Hi there everyone, a happy Friday, happy Easter. I hope that everyone has a wonderful long weekend over Easter, stay safe, and I hope that you get some time, if you're a writer, if you get some time to do some writing, and if you're not a writer, that you get to do something else that you love. So my blog post for this Friday is 3 tips on how to save for international travel when you're on a minimum wage. So varying away from writing a little bit this week, but I just wanted to put this little blog post together in light of my recent trip to Ireland, which I'm so happy to hear that so many of you enjoyed my posts from my trip to Ireland to research for my crime novel over there. So that's inspired me to do this little post today to give a little bit of a few tips and some inspiration as well. Before I started planning for this trip, I was feeling quite, I guess, demotivated because I do only work part-time, and a lot of the time it just felt like I just wasn't getting ahead with my savings plan. So I kind of got to the stage where I really had to reevaluate the way that I was saving for my trip. I had been trying to save a big bulk of money, like thousands of dollars, to put that aside for the trip. I was trying to save all the money for my trip and pay everything off all in one go, but it just wasn't happening. Obviously, money coming in and out all the time for bills and expenses, and I just couldn't get ahead in that regard with my savings for my trip. So I decided to look at it a little bit differently. I had started to make a list. You can kind of see it's all a little bit crossed out now, but if you can kind of see here, I'll try and make it a bit easier if you can read my handwriting. You can see that I've sort of started to make that I made some items that I've just kind of listed here, which was like Airbnb accommodation, daily expenses in Dublin. Also on there somewhere I've got like daily expenses in Galway, daily expenses in Kinvara, like all that sort of thing. So I was basically breaking down all my expenses, including my flights as well. Just breaking them down into items on my list, and then once I sort of knew how much I was going to spend all up on accommodation, on travel, on like transport, on food, on possibly activities, that sort of thing, I then broke that list down again into days. So where I could, I broke those expenses down into days. So mostly applicable to the accommodations and daily expenses side of the list of my expenses. So once I had a general idea of how much I was going to need to put away for accommodation costs, I then broke that down into days. So say I was staying for 3 days in Dublin, I worked out how much I would need for those 3 days, and I broke it down into 3 days. And then once I'd broken down those items, which also included my daily expenses, so like my food, transport, any activities that I did, that sort of thing, I applied it to that list as well. So once I had that broken down list, I then, as I went along throughout the weeks, whatever I could put away towards those expenses, I would tick that off my list. So say that I was only able to put aside $20 towards my Dublin daily expenses. I would put that down. I've sort of divided it into, however much I'd sort of, if I was able to sort of say, so I'm confusing myself a little bit. Say my daily expenses in one city was going to be $50, and I was spending 3 days in this city in Dublin. So one fortnight I would put away $50, and I would tally it up on my sheet, on my checklist, and then once I'd tallied up 3 times, then I know that I've saved enough money that I need for my daily expenses for my time in Dublin. So I hope that makes sense. It's just kind of breaking down the expenses and just sort of contributing, putting away for them little bit by bit. So like I said, I did that for flights, I did that for my accommodation and for my daily expenses. So just a couple of basic bullet points just to keep it nice and simple for you. I'm just going to get my little list here. Lay by your flights where you can. Sometimes with smaller trips where the flights are less expensive. I'm not a travel agent by any regards, but just what I've learned over the time, especially with this experience of lay buying my flights, is that for some of the smaller amounts you can't actually lay by flights. So I think it's got to be a couple of $100 or more for you to be able to lay by flights. Not exactly sure. Check with your travel agent. Also, I found that there was also not all flights are lay-buyable. So there was, even, with going as far as I was with, $1,500 worth of flights to pay, there was still some flights throughout that day or on that date that I couldn't lay by. So it was a little bit tricky to work out, but it was okay. It ended up being okay, so I managed to figure that out with my travel agent. So just be aware of that. With the agency I went through, I didn't have a limit as to how much I had to pay each week either. It was just basically I had to have my flights paid off 2 months in advance of my departure date. So I had about 6 months and before my departure date from when I booked my flights to when that cut-off date was, and I managed to pay that off quite easily. So yeah, sometimes I would be able to pay $100, sometimes I'd only be able to pay $50, sometimes I'd only be able to put $20 away. So I was able to manage it in that way. So that was really good. So that's really helpful. Try and find lay-by flights wherever you can, and I just found it was a lot easier to do that having a travel agent and an expert doing that, because like I said, sometimes it's a bit tricky trying to piece together what flights can be lay-by and what ones can't. So the next point on my list was breaking down the cost of my trip. So breaking it down into flights, into transport accommodation, so if you'll need to catch trains anywhere, airport transfers, public transport, food costs, excursion costs, so if you're going to do any tours or anything like that, any day tours, breaking that down, and then specifically for accommodation and daily expenses, breaking that down into days and then putting your money away and crossing that off in a tally system until you've saved up enough for all the days that you are somewhere. So if you're in Dublin for 3 days and it's $43 a night for your accommodation, if you put aside $43 a fortnight, or you can put aside $84 or however much it is, so you can put aside for 1 night, 2 nights, however much you can afford, and then once you have put aside, when it's been 6 weeks or whatever, and you've put aside enough for that block of accommodation, then you can do a big cross off your list, and that's a really wonderful feeling as well. So yeah, that's my 3 tips. I hope that those have been helpful. Any questions, do please leave a comment on my blog or on Facebook or whatever. That would be really great. And I hope that you have a wonderful Easter weekend. Please do follow my blog as well if you're interested in getting any more tips, specifically on writing techniques and writing tips and all that sort of thing. Do follow my blog, and so that'll make sure that you're updated whenever I post something new. You won't miss anything. Like I said, happy Easter, stay safe, and happy writing, and happy travelling as well. Bye.